And very pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is very much focused on AI, and in particular, the dark side of AI, and the threat that AI poses, and how it's driving an exponential increase in cyber threats generally to all different types of organisation, from the smallest to the very largest organisation, and regardless of the cybersecurity stance, posture, and investment that all of the organisations that we work with have. So, in addition to myself, Chris Mallett, I'm very pleased to be joined by Jim Simpson, who's Chief Executive Officer of ZipTech Services, to talk through the topic today. A bit of an introduction to myself. I'm Commercial Strategy Manager at Clear Insurance Management. We're one of the largest independent insurance brokers in the UK, looking after somewhere in the region of 60,000 clients, both personal clients and organisations of all sizes. Part of what we do is look after our clients' cyber insurance exposure, and hence why we like to run sessions like we are today to help our clients not only arrange effective insurance, but also understand the wider risk landscape and the steps that they can take outside of the insurance world to make sure that they are managing their risk of cyber attack as effectively as possible. Just a reference, because I know a fair few of our attendees will have joined the session by virtue of having a relationship with Lawshaw. Lawshaw is one of our constituent businesses within Clear Insurance Management. And of course, what we want to do as an overall broker is make sure that we make these sessions available to as many of our clients and as many of our partners as possible. So a particular welcome to any of you who've engaged with today's webinar by virtue of your relationship with Lawshaw. That's an introduction to me. Jim, if I could ask you to provide a little bit of an introduction to yourself and perhaps a bit of an overview of what ZipTech Services provide as well.
Sure. So my name is Jim Simpson. I'm the CEO of ZipTech Services. I've been in IT technology for pretty much my whole career. To give you an idea, the first computer I ever used did not have a screen. It had a paper roll, which ages me a little bit. But I've worked overseas, UK, right around the world, in software development and in support and cybersecurity. ZipTech Services, we are an IT services company. What we do is we help companies unlock their productivity with modern technology and new ways of working, which means we help them with strategy, developing a strategy and a plan. We help them implement that plan, and then we help them manage their technology to make sure it runs well and is cyber secure. So that's support and management as well. And we're a team, we've clients across the globe. We're not a huge company, but we have clients across the globe because of our boutique and deep expertise in these areas. So that's us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jim. And you referenced that deep expertise that you have in this space, and that's why we're delighted to be partnering with you today to really bring to light exactly how AI is changing the cybersecurity landscape. So over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be covering a range of different topics, starting with talking you through why AI is increasing the likelihood and the severity of cyber threats, and why AI is a really significant enabler for cyber criminals and driving more cyber incidents for organisations like yourselves. Jim will very kindly talk through some examples in practice of where we've seen that impact and how it's affected the organisations that ZipTech have worked with, and perhaps some of the worst case scenarios that you can expect by virtue of this AI-enabled cyber threat. And we'll then get on to actually what we can do about it. It's not all doom and gloom, and there are some really tangible, practical, but also accessible steps that all organisations can take to really protect themselves effectively against cyber threats, whether that's in the context of their systems and processes, the individuals that sit within their organisations, or their customer base and how they can engage effectively to prevent risk coming from their customers. And then I'll talk you through a little bit about the cyber insurance market, what the market looks like at the moment, some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of pricing, but also in terms of what underwriters look like when it comes to a good cyber risk versus a bad one, and how some of those practical steps taken by organizations are viewed by insurers, how underwriters perceive them, and perhaps from a cyber insurance angle, which areas of protection are most appropriate to drive the most effective cyber risk transfer. So that's the structure for today's conference, and delighted once again to have you all with us. AI is a topic that is rarely far from the headlines. It was only yesterday where AI was one of the central tenets of the UK's International Investment Summit, and the new government focused quite heavily on removing regulation to stimulate the development of AI as a mechanism to grow the economy, to make businesses more efficient and to unlock the potential for growth. And as I said earlier, it's very rare that we go a day without seeing a new news story about how AI will drive change in the world, whether that is something very material, very serious, very practical, and around things like medical diagnosis, around things like operational efficiency, around things like defense, or whether it's a little bit more light-hearted in the context of using AI to plan your holidays and decide what you're going to make from the ingredients that sit in your fridge. But as I've said, as much as AI has a wealth of different positive practical applications, it also makes life much easier for cyber criminals and has the ability to be used as a really effective tool to change the way in which they look to exploit existing vulnerabilities within organizations, more often than not, for their own financial gain. That's the context of AI. And what I'll do now is hand over to Jim really to talk us through, in the first instance, why AI is increasing the likelihood and severity of cyber threats, why it's contributing to a rise of cybercrime. So Jim, over to you.
Okay. So I don't know how many of you have actually used AI or maybe played with it or used it with real anger, as it were, in a real operational situation. But if you have used it, you realize how incredibly powerful it is. It is genuinely game-changing. It is, if you haven't got into it, it is changing industries, it is changing companies and turning businesses inside out. And to give you an idea of the power of it, I'm sure you've heard of ChatGPT from OpenAI. ChatGPT's most recent version, which is a pre-release, is not a full release yet, has an IQ of 120. An IQ of 120 means that ChatGPT is more intelligent than 91% of the human population, which I think is a startling statistic. By the end of next year-ish, provided it continues to develop at the rate it is, which is incredible, it will at least be as intelligent as Einstein. Now, this incredible and really flexible intelligence, 24/7, is available to you for a phenomenal 50 pence a day. It is just staggering. I never imagined that it would be so accessible and so cheap. We did a project for a client recently where we did, in fact, it was to do with backup and recovery, which we'll talk about later. And we used AI to do some things and to run a complete test of their backup sets of servers and stuff. The cost of it was 37 pence a test, which is, this stuff is very cheap. You have to invest a lot of effort in making it work and figuring out how it works in your business. But there's 2 points buried in there. Number one, it is incredibly powerful. Number two, it is incredibly cheap and is available to everybody. And guess what? You know, we're talking about this in the legitimate business world, but guess what? The criminals have noticed as well. They knew all of this. I don't know whether any of you have been exposed to any of these criminal organizations, but they are very, very deeply techy. They are incredibly nerdy, technical organizations. They are brilliant technical people. They are absolutely using AI. And they're doing that from the shelter of places like Russia, for example, where they have to follow the rules, they never go get caught, and Russia and places like that are very happy that it continues. They do not mind at all. And that's what you're up against. These incredibly technical people using this incredibly technical tools in a country that's never going to stop them do it to take money from you. And that's what's going on. So one of the things, so there's been a general buzz discussion in the IT community about the criminals using this and the impact that it's having. It's definitely having an impact without question. I mean, I know from our clients that the number of breaches they are having has absolutely increased. Our clients are having more breaches than they ever had before. Now, because they're our clients, that's not such a big issue. We'll talk about that later, about what they do and how they can recover from it. But many companies do not recover from it. So the number of incidents is definitely increasing. In fact, it's increased so much that, believe it or not, the White House has intervened. America is very, very nervous about what's going on in this space. It's also got to do with, of course, national security interests as well. They're worried about their businesses being hit by cybercrime because they are being hit by cybercrime. I mean, to give you one example, there was a large pharmaceutical company was hit again by people hiding in Russia. It was a ransomware situation where they encrypt all the data and you have to pay a ransom to get the data back, for them to unencrypt it. This kind of thing is on the rise again, believe it or not, quite significantly. The ransom they paid was 22 million, and that was the smallest cost they had. The entire cost of getting taken out and recovering was, at the pharmaceutical company's estimate, 872 million, in addition to the $22 million. So ginormous costs. And it's happening worldwide. The port of Nagoya in Japan was closed down because of a cybersecurity attack. We've all heard about the attacks in the NHS and various other places and so forth. Absolutely everybody is under threat. And the payoff for these companies is so, or these organizations, is so enormous. And the incentive for them is massive. And the downside risk for them is absolutely zero almost. So that's what we're facing.
Jim, it seems like it's a bit of a worst case scenario where we have these bad actors who operate out of territories where they don't face any sort of realistic prospect of being caught. They've got huge incentive in terms of some of those financial returns, and you cite sort of minimum payout of 22 million. That's a fairly substantial amount of money for any organization, no matter what the size. I'm keen to understand, though, and for the benefit of everyone on the call, how is AI, in a practical sense, driving an increase in that threat? Because you talk about ransomware, and we're of course all aware that ransomware attacks have happened. We all remember, well, most of us will do, the WannaCry attacks a good number of years ago on the NHS that meant that thousands upon thousands of appointments were cancelled and operations were delayed. But it sort of feels like ransomware, unfortunately, has been something that's really entered modern parlance and has been around for a little while. So in the context of AI, how is that enhancing the ransomware risk, for example? Is it a case that it's making it easier, more efficient for cyber criminals to commit these ransomware attacks? Is it making the ransomware technology and approach more successful, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both. I mean, you remember that not only are these cyber criminals deeply technical, I mean, really very, very technical, but they're actually also well organized and well funded by all of the ransomware they get. So they can afford to do it properly. So let's go through some of the things that AI is making a difference with. What they do, the way they generally get in, not always, is something called a phishing attack, which basically is where they send a fake email into somebody clicks on the link, it takes them to a website that is a facsimile of maybe Microsoft or whoever it happens to be, and they put in their details, and they get their password and stuff, and then they use that to get into your system. Now, it used to be relatively easy to identify these fake emails, but they don't have spelling mistakes anymore. These things are very well written, and they're using AI to develop these things. Marketing is one of the first use cases of AI, which is writing good copy, writing compelling copy with a sense of urgency and so forth. Guess what? The criminals are using it to do exactly the same thing for their phishing emails. and they're doing it really, really well. I'm seeing stuff that I think, wow, that is, you kind of have to be in the top. You have to know to realize that that was a piece of ransomware. It's really big. So that's helping. That's helping them get in. The sites that you go to where you click on the link, I mean, they're indistinguishable now from the real site. They can build almost exact replicas, and these things are really good. So people then put their details in and they get into the system. Then, of course, as soon as they get your password and login details, they get into the system, and AI is helping them explore, understand the data, and so forth when they're in there as well. So that's one way they're doing that. The second way is they are running highly, highly organized campaigns. In fact, they do A/B split tests now, believe it or not. They do A/B split testing to check what works and what doesn't work. When they got a new kind of ransomware, they test it out in the developing world, like Africa. And then when they get it completely tweaked, they quickly bring it to UK, US, Europe, and so forth, where they get the maximum bang for the buck. These are very sophisticated, very well organized organizations. They also do, they have like bots or robots, software robots crawling the web, trying to probe your websites and your systems to see if somebody's got a stupidly easy password that they can get in with and all that kind of stuff. Previously, that would have been hard to crack. But now with AI, they can whiz through lists of passwords really, really quickly and do that. So they can do all that kind of thing. And these bots are clever enough to learn. So not only are they just static and crawling around the web, they learn as they go. So they say, oh, that worked on this company. I looked at a company in a situation 500 companies ago that was a bit like that. I'm going to go back and have a check because these things are learning. So I'll give you an example of learning, machine learning. So probably as a lot of people know that the NHS has introduced AI for mammograms, for reading mammograms. And it is already better than radiographers and doctors at reading mammograms and detecting it. So how did that happen? So the thing is that a radiologist is going to be just pretty much as good as in 24 as they were in 2023. Their knowledge increases slightly because, I don't know, few thousand mammograms they've looked at and a bit more experience. But AI has probably read millions in that same period and has got them all in memory and can see them all and can see the patterns that none of us can see. So its learning is going through the roof. That's how AI works. Guess what? The criminals know that. That's what they're doing. And that's how they're using it. So it's really made a big difference. And it is no longer a worst case to get breached. In my opinion, it is a normal case to be breached. You really have to expect it. And you have to be planned for it. Because they're miles ahead of you in AI. They're miles ahead of you technically. They're well organized and they have no rules to follow and there is no risk of them getting caught.
And I'd just pick up, Jim, and just re-emphasize the point that you make around phishing vulnerability in particular. We've all absolutely been in a situation where either in a personal or a professional capacity, we've had an email that you immediately know, as I would put it in layman's terms, doesn't pass the smell test.
It's a sort of Nigerian prince kind of thing.
The absolute classic advent of phishing attacks. And this doesn't seem right, regardless of the actual approach to try and get you to click on the illicit link or share some sensitive information. We look at the format, we look at the presentation of those phishing attempts and think, okay, this all feels a little bit iffy. I don't think my bank would have this many spelling mistakes in an email that they send to me. I don't think that they'd have used a logo from 5 years ago. I don't think that they'd have failed to get some basic grammar and punctuation into this email.
Those days are over.
Absolutely. Always used to be the case. And I think quite a lot of organisations, certainly those organisations that I speak to when talking to them about cyber risk, would be pretty confident that they could spot those challenging phishing emails, spot that potential threat to their business by virtue of that traditional red flag, if you like, in terms of grammar, in terms of punctuation, in terms of presentation. And it might have been fair to say 5, 10 years ago that actually having that diligence and having that understanding within your organization about what's a potential phishing email versus what's not, and recognizing those telltale red flags might have been enough to protect you. It might have been enough to make sure that you didn't click on those links and introduce ransomware or otherwise create vulnerability and unauthorized access to your network. Because actually, some of the cyber criminals just wouldn't be in a place to invest the time or wouldn't have the inclination to invest the time to generate more tailored, more specific, more honed and higher quality content. It was a scattergun approach, and the phishing emails went out, hence why we all received an email from that apocryphal Nigerian prince. And they were relying on the fact that a very, very small proportion of people, generally vulnerable recipients of those emails, might click a link, might share some sensitive personal information. The fact of the matter is now there doesn't need to be that resource investment to make things far more tailored, far more slick in their presentation, precisely because of AI. AI takes that work away from cyber criminals. They can feed into a large language model and use that to generate real high quality content. They're particularly motivated and they recognize a particular opportunity with your organization. They can feed innumerable data points in so that they can really drill down into a style, into a presentation format that looks incredibly legitimate and makes it far harder to detect where an email might be a phishing attempt versus something that's legitimate and genuine. And that's the power of AI for these cyber criminals. They understand, as Jim said, how to exploit this because they are incredibly technical. And it takes away the legwork. It takes away the time and energy investment that they would otherwise or historically have needed to make in order to generate really compelling and really hard to detect phishing attempts.
Yes, and that, Chris, is a sort of problem we're all familiar with. But because of AI, there are new incoming problems, new kinds of attacks we've never seen before. And this one sounds like science fiction, sounds like something in Hollywood, but it's actually happening. I'm sure many of you have heard of deep fakes. A deep fake is where you create a audio voice that mimics or sounds like somebody else, or indeed a complete video image. So a deep fake can be an AI person that looks like a colleague of yours, sounds like a colleague of yours, acts like a colleague of yours, who's on a video call. And I know this sounds like science fiction, but it's not. So there's a company called Arup. They're a large international construction and engineering company. They had a very sophisticated deep fake in Hong Kong. And what happened was there was a member of staff and a couple of more senior members of staff in a video conference. Turns out that the couple of senior members of staff in the video conference were not real. They were AI deep fakes. I'm guessing the less senior person didn't know them so well, so they were convincing, and they got that person to release $24 million. And he just sent, because these two senior people telling him to do it. They looked like real people, the people he knew. They sounded like the people he knew. So he did it. So you have got to be able to be expecting in the future something called deepfakes to happen. It's not science fiction, it's real. How do I know it's not science fiction? I, a few weeks ago, went and created a deepfake of Jim Simpson. It was an audio deepfake, it wasn't a video deepfake. It was so easy to do, it took me 2 hours roundabout, and I uploaded a number of voice files for me, and it mimicked my voice. I then tweeted and played about with it about a little bit to get it to work. The good news is my wife knew it wasn't me. That's good. On the other hand, I sent it to 3 colleagues, and 2 of them did not realize it was wrong. One of them was suspicious. Imagine if it, and that took me 2 hours to produce and $170 for a year subscription with the tool. So it's like £10 a month. And I created something in 2 hours that fooled my colleagues, a number of my colleagues.
It's a pretty scary thought, Jim, particularly where there's individuals who you're working with day in, day out who have fallen.
It's actually, these people were people I work with every day. They know the sound of my voice. They know me. The one who knew me best spotted it or was uncomfortable and asked.
And I think this sort of leads us on to one of the questions that we've had raised in the chat. And I appreciate there've been a few so far, and we'll circle back where possible. But we've had a question in from DLS, and apologies, I've only got your initials there. Really raising the view and raising the question that actually a lot of the AI tools that they've engaged with still seem to need a skilled human to finalize, albeit there's a variation of the sort of takeaway menu issue. In terms of things being recognizable, perhaps in a similar vein to some of those more historic non-AI enabled phishing attacks. Is there a view, Jim, particularly in the context of you talking about the exponential progression of the intelligence of AI, when you think the quality of that sort of large language model generated output won't need that skilled human variation to finalize? And I asked that question, and I think it's worth highlighting that actually it seems already from the example that you articulate there that the ability to recognize something as AI generated is only as good as the individual who's receiving that content. Hence why you've had a couple of colleagues who work with you day in, day out, but have still not been able to identify that it's not you.
Yeah, so usually when I hear people saying that, oh, it's not very good, or it doesn't give the full thing, or it's not very, the document it produces or whatever it happens is not very good and so forth. I usually find when I talk to those people, they're using a free version. They're using a free version of AI. And that's usually the reason why. ChatGPT, it's called ChatGPT Plus. It's an incredible $20 a month, which with 0 months commitment, it is incredibly powerful. And if you use that regularly, and if you train it and you set some things up, it's absolutely superb. And guess what? These criminals are not using the free, cheap tools. They're really not using the bad ones. They're using the absolute best. They're adding their own training, their own expertise. It's not just the raw model. They're providing a lot of additional information and training and stuff around that. And they come out with this stuff that is really superbly good. We do that for legitimate reasons for our clients, but we implement these models for our clients. We provide training and stuff around it, and we help implement it. And it's game changing for those businesses and some of the things that they do. And the criminals are doing just the same. So that's usually, and also you've got to remember that these things are getting better. Also, quite often when I hear that comment, people are thinking about, well, I used it a year ago. It is increasing in power by 10x, by 10 times every 12 months at the minute. The current version, which is on pre-release, it's not quite out yet, has an IQ of 120, which is greater than 91% of the population, which is mind-blowing. In 12 months, it'll be 10 times more powerful. In 24 months, it'll be 100 times more powerful. They think that it'll have somewhere around about the IQ of Einstein by the end of 25. That's for $20 a month. amazing. So these tools are getting better really, really quickly. I've been using AI for years, and it was kind of a toddler. It's now a university graduate. It's one hell of a tool, and it's going to be a PhD level soon. So these things are getting better at a rate that is hard to keep up with. I've never seen a piece of technology develop as fast as this, and they are now really good. So the models are getting better if you pay for the right ones and you learn how to use it properly. And it doesn't require technical training to use it properly. What you need to think of with AI is that you have an intelligent assistant in front of you, and you're working with an intelligent assistant. You ask it questions in the right way, rather like you would a real human assistant. You have a to and fro engaged conversation, or, oh, could you expand that? Have you dealt with all the pros and cons? Have I left something out? Could you critique it for me? How would you make it better? All of that kind of conversation like you'd have with a real human. And that, when you use that kind of approach and you have ChatGPT set up properly, there's some parameters, they're not complicated, some parameters, then the results are stunning.
It's a scary thought, that rate of progression. And certainly the trajectory of 10 times greater intelligence on an annual basis means that even if we do have those particular telltale signs that might still exist in those phishing attacks, it really won't be long until, particularly the paid for, particularly the most powerful models that exist out there, really
Yeah,
are indistinguishable and don't need that skilled human in the process to finalize.
yeah,
Um, and and it's worth remembering that the AI, the large language model, is only half of the equation here. It may be the tool that is used by our bad actors, by our cyber criminals to create these phishing attacks. And of course, as that continues to be more sophisticated, we continue to get more vulnerable. The other side of the equation here is, of course, the individual recipient of that phishing attack. And we're unfortunately not in the same scenario where across all different types of organizations, the rate of awareness of threats, the rate of acute sensitivity to the potential threats that come with phishing attacks is growing anywhere near the 10 times on an annual basis that we're seeing the development of AI and
yeah,
large language models. The one final thought, just before we move on a little bit, that I'd leave everyone with is Jim's talked in particular about the technological capability of these cyber criminals, the threat actors, and how they are incredibly techy and can understand how to best generate value for their particular ends and purposes out of AI models. As AI continues to improve, we're unfortunately facing a landscape where actually the uneducated cyber criminals, the uneducated threat actors will increasingly look at AI as well to plug their own knowledge gaps. And so we have this unfortunate scenario where cyber criminals who get it, who might have been those historic cyber criminals who had to, in effect, do it themselves before AI came along to take on some of the burden, will be joined by a population of cyber criminals who, quite frankly, would never have thought of cyber as a means to make some illicit money historically because they just didn't have that technical expertise. When AI can provide that expertise for them without them having to learn anything new, then we expect, unfortunately, a bit of a wave, a bit of a second wave of increase in cyber threats, cyber attack, by virtue of people recognizing that this might be a new way to make a quick buck that doesn't involve having to pick a lock, break into someone's premises, and steal some goods. I'm
yeah.
conscious that we
And it is easy to use as well, Chris, as you said. For example, my 8-year-old granddaughter loves AI, loves ChatGPT, and constructs stories and stuff and so forth. And she really loves it. So it's simple enough for an 8-year-old to use and to get pretty good results out of the stories she creates. Some of them are a bit strange, but that's, a different matter.
maybe that's the sort of direction to everyone on the webinar. If you've got an 8-year-old son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter, let them loose with AI and see just how effective they can be and then think
Yeah.
about what that would mean for a skilled cyber criminal using it as a tool for their own ends. I'm conscious that we talked.
Interestingly, I use AI a lot, and my AI, after a while, realized it wasn't me. It was
Right,
my granddaughter.
okay, that's a scary thought. We've talked a little bit there about, or we talked at some length there about how AI is enabling and increasing the severity and frequency of cyber threat. I'm conscious, though, to make sure that this session isn't all doom and gloom. And what would be great now, Jim, would be to get from you just some of those practical things that organizations can be doing to
Yeah.
really effectively protect themselves against AI. I think we
Yeah.
operate in a landscape where cyber threat is so sophisticated that, as you said at the outset of this webinar, it's more of a case of when, not if. And I'll come on to talking about how insurance can be a bit of an enabler to make sure that the when doesn't become crippling and doesn't become the sort of death knell of organizations. But actually, there are steps and there are things that organizations can do prior to suffering a cyber attack to make sure that
Yeah.
they are more resilient. So I'd appreciate if you can speak a little bit to some of the things that all of the organizations on this call should be thinking about as a bit of a starter for 10 around their own cyber resilience.
The good news is, as you rightly say, there is plenty of good news, is that you can deal with this problem. It's not like you need to, throw up your hands and give up. Quite the opposite. You can deal with this problem, but you have got to expect it as the norm. You have got to expect it now. It's not like a unexpected event anymore. It's becoming normalized. So the first thing is that the legitimate technology industry is raising the bar all the time. So they are bringing out new versions of software, new versions of security tools, and so forth all of the time. So there are a number of companies provide anti-phishing tools, which are very, very good. And of course, by the way, they use AI to develop these anti-phishing tools. They are AI driven, and they are superbly good. So they're spotting problems, they're spotting those kind of emails, they're preventing them getting through. They're learning from the whole of their installed base across companies of what is a legitimate email and so forth. And it's getting, just like the mammogram example I gave you, it's getting brilliant at spotting those patterns on what's right and what's not. So that really helps. So I definitely do that. The cloud is another plus point. It is very difficult for us as SMBs to afford and implement the kind of fortress-like security that we would like on premise. The cloud technology vendors, people like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, who you might well have your system sitting in their cloud, they put huge amounts of money, enormous amounts of money into cybersecurity, and they are very good at it. They do now provide better cybersecurity than you could have on-premise. On-premise is now less safe than being in the cloud, without question, because it's so hard for you to be that safe as it is in the cloud. And pretty much everything will run in the cloud, so there's no reason not to be there in that more secure environment. There are various tools and stuff to help you, and there's certain actions you can take. So I would definitely get in the cloud. In my opinion, I would be 100% in the cloud. I am, almost all my clients are, and it makes a difference. One of the big things that makes a difference with is backup and recovery. That is one of the, if you sort of took nothing else from today, it's about backup and recovery. You've got to expect to be hit. Therefore, you have to have proper backup and a proper disaster recovery plan, a breach recovery plan. You've got to do that. You just have to do that. And backup and recovery used to be hard and it used to be expensive. You'd have all kinds of servers on site and off site and all kinds of stuff, and it all seemed to be hung together by chewing gum and string and a lot of expensive technology expertise. It was hard. And then the recovery was really hard as well. Well, the good news is all of the cloud vendors, but the one I know best is Microsoft, but this applies to all of the cloud vendors, have absolutely superb backup that, 5, 10 years ago, not even the best enterprise level companies would have been able to have. And now you can have it for pennies. So Microsoft Azure is the name of the Microsoft Cloud Platform you run your servers and everything on. And it has a thing called backup and instant recovery. And it's very well named, it's instant. And what we do with all of our clients now is we back up absolutely everything. No more of this, oh, well, I won't back that up to save money or that kind of stuff. It always causes tears at the end of the day because it's always what you need. And to back up 99% or 95% is much harder than backing up 100%. And when it's so cheap, there's no reason not to, because you can take that stuff and put it, you can put your important stuff on fast storage for fast instant access. The other stuff can go in cheap archive cold storage, which is really cheap. And we can now recover a server more quickly than it actually takes the engineer to fill in the admin details on the ticket. That just wasn't possible 5 years ago. It's unbelievable. And the price of it is also unbelievably low. You used to pay, and I've seen businesses paying, many thousands of pounds, tens of thousands of pounds for their monthly backup. I remember we did it a while ago with a client who did a really large amount of data. I can't remember if it was 7 or 10 terabytes, but a big amount of data. I think it was £200 a month. I'm not saying it's that for you, depends on the circumstances, but you're not talking huge sums of money. And given the danger of spending that relatively small sum of money to sort out your backup and be able to then recover it really quickly is just absolutely stunning. And it really works. Since I've never seen anybody who has this set up properly and is running it fail to be able to recover.
And
Never.
how often, just to chip in with one of the questions that's been raised, have you got a particular view of how often backups should be run? It seems like it's such a straightforward way to make an organization resilient to cyber attack, to make sure that actually you can recover as and when these threats, which feel a bit inevitable, do come to pass. Is this something where a one-size-fits-all approach works on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on a weekly basis? Or is that something that should be a bit more bespoke to the organization? What's your view on that?
It's bespoke to the organization because some people can't afford to lose any data because of the importance of that data. Therefore, they're backing up continuously, as it were. Other people, they don't mind if they lose half a day's data or a day's data or whatever. And clearly the people who are backing up absolutely everything as is happening is costing them more. Those people who are backing up, say, daily. I personally, I would never do less than daily these days, given the cost. I don't think there's any reason to do daily. And then you can keep your monthly backups because, again, it's so cheap. You can keep your archive data for your 7 years or whatever you need as well in there. But also the important thing is, how often do you test it? I just see people so often who, particularly for the business owners or the partners, they don't really understand the technology. All of you here are experts in the law. I don't understand the law in the same way that you don't understand technology. But very often what happens is you rely on it being right, but you don't know that it's right. So I would really, really strongly advise you that you test that on a regular basis. We do it for our clients once a quarter. We do a sample test where we bring up a whole load of files from different servers to make sure you really can. And we do that once a quarter. We have some clients who actually want to do a complete shutdown, turn everything off. That has implications for the business, and then a recovery that morning or that day. Well worth doing. But I would definitely make sure that if you haven't got it in your hands today, make sure you have a backup document, a written down how your backup works and how it is recovered. Because if you have an attack and you haven't written down how it's backed up, you've got no chance.
It's something that's so often overlooked, and particularly when I speak to clients, there's a bit of an acceptance that backups are important. In the same way that many organizations will have a disaster recovery plan if their business premises catches
Yeah.
fire or they turn up and it's underwater. But actually testing that and actually knowing that that's going to work effectively in practice is so important.
Yeah.
I've seen examples of a really large haulage firm that did create backups, and they did it at 7-day frequency, but it wasn't a process that had ever been tested. And as and when they suffered a cyber attack, as and when their systems were compromised, because they hadn't gone through the testing process and because they hadn't had quite the right advice or approached things in quite the right way, they didn't quite appreciate that their backups were just as vulnerable, hosted in the same network architecture as their main system, which meant, of course, when this cyber attack occurred, they lost the backups in the same way that they lost their operating system, which effectively rendered those backups redundant and worthless. And so it's a really important point that all organizations, of course, should be thinking about backing up. Think about how much data you could afford to lose when defining the frequency of those backups. I would say as an absolute minimum, and thinking about this in the context of how a cyber insurer would approach it, any backup frequency that's less frequent than once a month is probably not going to be sufficient. There's not many organizations that could survive with losing more than a month's worth of most.
And I'd say the cost of doing it is so low, I would just do it daily. I would just do it absolutely daily. Cost is so low now, if you're in the cloud.
And so really important point in terms of both doing the backups and doing the testing. And obviously you've referenced there, Jim, use of the cloud. And really capitalizing on those cloud providers' own expertise around cybersecurity, which effectively gives you access to much more sophisticated security than you would be able to achieve if you were doing it at an individual organization or enterprise level. And then, of course, the anti-phishing tools that you've talked about as well. Is there anything on the human side of things that organizations can be doing to address that vulnerability, whether that's across their existing staff base, or whether it's across their supplier or their customer base to really protect themselves against the increased cyber risk?
There's one final point I'd like to make on the backup and recovery before we move on to that. Is if you get nothing else out of this hour and a half, go to your IT people today after this. Do not let them pull the wool over your eyes. You run successful businesses, your partners in successful businesses. If they explain it properly, you are capable of understanding it. And ask for the written backup and recovery plan and get it in your hand to see that it exists. And then say to them, when was the last time you tested this? And I want to see the written results of that test. If you do nothing else based on this, do that today and don't take any waffle from them. If they can't give you that, you've got a problem.
It's a really, really important and really simple action that everyone can be taking. Ask that question. Or indeed, if you sit within an organization that doesn't have that separate, dedicated IT functionality, ask that question of yourself. Do you have that in place? Is there something tangible that you can point to? Do you know how that backup process would work in the event that a cyber attack happens? Because, of course, it could happen now. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen overnight.
We manage cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity for quite a few companies. And one of the things is interesting. The White House, US president, has waded into this debate about this. He thinks it's that important. And he says something similar to what you alluded to a second ago, Chris, that actually having a third party check these things is a really worthwhile suggestion. The White House suggests just 5 things. And one of them is have a third party check the work. Make sure your cybersecurity secure with a third party check. And we often do audits of people to look at their infrastructure, whether it's set up properly and whether they are properly cyber secure, and therefore how would they manage it. One of the other big issues around this that interesting, the White House also point out is updates. Critically important. Updates are patches. So all the time, criminals are finding new ways into this incredibly complicated computer network you have. And it's because it's so complicated, it's impossible to shut all the doors. But the criminals are always looking for and finding new ways in. And the software vendors like Microsoft and Google and so forth and Amazon are fighting back, and they are issuing little fixes to all of those holes all the time. And those are called patches or updates or upgrades. They need to be applied regularly, at least every week, minimum every week, absolute minimum. And you think applying those patches was easy. It is really, really hard. So you will need a system and an approach and a process to patching, and it makes a huge, huge difference. That was one of the other 5 things that the White House told businesses in America they had to fix, was the patching. So get your system audited, get the infrastructure audit, get the cybersecurity audit, and then decide what to do. And we never audited a system yet that's been completely clean. Never. You will get something out of it, even if it's only being able to sleep at night.
It's one of those things, Jim, that I admit, as a bit of a cyber layman, it's a bit irritating when you see the pop-up of your software needs to be patched. You need to run this update. Please restart your computer. And if you're like me and logging on a little bit before you need to be doing something, you think, is this going to take 15 minutes? Is it going to take an hour and a half out of my day? Can I afford to run the patch? The reality is you need to run the patch because, generally speaking, the patching of software is designed not only to ensure that it continues to operate efficiently, but it's designed to make sure that any vulnerabilities that have been identified are corrected, are rectified, and are made safe. And it's been a big factor in a lot of cyber losses that I've seen through clients that carry cyber insurance, that expectation that things will be safe and secure, and actually the challenge that comes with the lack of an efficient patching policy that exists within an organization, meaning that there's a known vulnerability that a cyber criminal can exploit and use to get into their system. And from an insurance standpoint, we're increasingly seeing cyber insurers wanting to know what the policy is across organizations about applying patches, when they get applied, what frequency they're applied to systems, because we increasingly see cyber claims arise, losses hit businesses, hit organizations, and it subsequently comes out through forensic investigation that the reason why a cyber criminal, the reason why a threat actor has been able to get access into that system is precisely because they've exploited a known vulnerability where patching would have shored up that hole, would have closed that weakness, and actually would have protected that business from cyber attack.
And patching is hard. It's a logistics process. It's very complicated. But the sad thing is that most IT departments or companies are process-free zones. They do it by the seat of their pants. We all know that. You can feel it. You need an ironclad process. It's a logistics management process to do that. But once you have it set up and you keep maintaining it, it keeps you more cyber secure. Doesn't guarantee you won't get hit. You will get hit. But if you have the backup and recovery we mentioned sorted out properly, you will not be the end of the world. You will be able to recover.
If we could just talk about that human aspect then, Jim, and what organizations can do outside of the technical approach to protect their business effectively. Let's make the assumption that we've got an organization that's accessing the anti-phishing tools, that's using the cloud effectively, that's creating and importantly testing backups, and that is absolutely diligent around their patching policy. As soon as a patch is available, it's installed and it's applied to the network. We know that the human in the process, the end user, is a significant point of vulnerability. So if all of our technical approach is correct, how do we do and what can we do as organizations to make ourselves a bit more secure when it comes to the human element that presents a bit of risk to us?
So I believe that so most employees are good at what they do, but they're not technical experts. They're not certainly not cybercriminal experts, which is a niche of technology, which is niche in itself. So we can't expect them to know. I mean, most people in this call, or many people, wouldn't know how to identify those phishing attempts. And the key is really simple. It's really old-fashioned. It really works. Training. Simple as that. Training people. I find that people simply don't know, but they want to help. They want to do the right thing, but they've no idea how to spot a phishing attempt, no idea what to do. So that is a key, is a regular training. I remember some years ago we dealt with a company that did pipes for the oil industry around the world. They kind of had an office in every location you'd never want to go for holiday. Yeah, it was that kind of business. The worst places in the world to go for this kind of thing. And every office had at least one server in it. And they I think, a couple of hundred offices around the world. They did quite a lot. And they would literally get one of their servers somewhere in the world ransomed every week. Every week. And it was just an ongoing nightmare for them. And we worked with them to improve the cybersecurity, that harden their systems, which helped. But the biggest breakthrough was training. We put in place some training for their staff. And once a week getting ransomed became once a quarter. Big, big, big difference. Training really, really works. Now, training is also really hard in the sense that we all forget to do it, and what about the schedule and all that kind of stuff. The good news is there are now very, very good systems out there to provide cyber security training for people, for the human beings. So what they generally do is they're called anti-phishing systems, not surprisingly. And what they do is, first of all, they simulate a phishing attempt in your company by sending very good-looking fake emails. This needs to be set up in advance, and finding out the level of awareness or who's aware or whatever. And then they have a huge bank of videos, plus more being made all the time because of new threats. And every month, or as frequently as you want, in fact, they will send out to every member of staff a new email. And every member of staff then will watch this email. They're generally about 3 minutes long. They're very, very simple. They're absolutely superb. And then they have to answer a multiple choice. It's a simple multiple choice, but it just makes sure that they didn't press the play button on the video and then go off and make a cup of coffee. So they answer a multiple choice question, and they get something like this every month. I am really, really impressed by these. I think they're really, really good. And it's an automated system by doing that does this, and it takes your members of staff genuinely 5 minutes a month. Simple as that. And in ZipTech, we do it, even though we're techies. We use that in our own internal staff, and I do those videos every month as well. I watch them and I answer the multiple choice questions. And what happens over time, it creates a level of awareness that this is an issue, but it also gives you, the individual, some tools for spotting it and what to do. And those systems are absolutely superb. And yet again, they're cheap as chips. These things are not expensive. So I'll mention a few names. They're worth looking at. There's one called KnowBe4, which is good. And there's one called Barracuda. That's the one we use in ZipTech and we use for all of our clients. And the Barracuda ones are absolutely superb. As a KnowBe4 one, we use the Barracuda because it also does email security at the same time. So it does checks all the emails, make sure nothing bad's getting in, and provides training and stuff as well. And it's just absolutely superb. I don't know, what does it cost? Somewhere, depending on where you buy it, somewhere between 10 and 15 pounds a month a user. So it's not high. And it's important to contrast that cost with the cost of getting hit. We get approached by people regularly who've been hit, and then they become clients when we recover them. Two that we get approached by. One is a firm of 155 people. They had a lot of servers. They had 60 servers. And by the way, we see that as a phenomena in companies that are hit by cybercriminals, is they have a lot of servers and it's just a bit of a mess and it's untidy. And it's a sign that there's something not right. Anyway, they got hit. They tell me that the cost, they told me in private that the cost of doing this, the cost of recovering was £800,000. A company of 155 people in the UK. They said it knocked their company back 2 years to recover from it, deal with all the client issues, all of the issues, the staff issue, everything that came through it. And the other thing that happens is, I don't know who's responsible for IT in your organization, but you know, the person who's responsible for IT in your organization, they always seem to take early retirement shortly after this, because it gets quite unpleasant. And in that case, it was the CEO who was directly responsible, and he had to take early retirement. Another company, very similar, firm of accountants, about 100 staff, they were taken down for 6 weeks. Firm of accountants like yourselves as law firms charging for their time, not able to operate properly for 6 weeks. The cost they reckoned was around £750,000. So these are big costs. So these costs of sorting these things out and preventing them are massively lower. So I would recommend something like KnowBe4 or Barracuda. It makes a really big difference. I'd also recommend that maybe your company meetings, I'm sure you have company meetings on a regular basis. We do them quarterly. We almost always do some kind of cyber security training at it, even though we're techies. Every single member of every person who joins ZipTech has to do some cybersecurity training. And we make that part of the onboarding, and we've recorded a video, and they have to look through our IT policy and all that kind of thing and be familiar with it. And that's part of our onboarding. So people aren't getting on board not knowing about this kind of stuff. And they're immediately getting the monthly emails to bring them up to speed, the monthly videos on cybersecurity they're getting up. So all of those things, and it's not expensive, and it's common sense. And all of those things make a huge, huge difference, Chris.
Thanks for that, Jim, and hopefully that's helped give a bit of a pointer to people in terms of not only the value of that training to address the human area of risk, but also some of those providers that can really parachute in that training support. I know KnowBe4 are the provider that we use at Clear Insurance Management, and can speak to their quality as a provider of that training. We absolutely know that as much as businesses go through training or put their staff through training, that it doesn't 100% eliminate the risk. In the same way that accessing all of the technical solutions like patching, like backing up, like use of the cloud, and like anti-phishing tools doesn't eliminate 100% of the risk. So with a little bit of an eye on time and conscious that we're due to wrap up in 5 minutes or so, I'll just give a bit of a view about how cyber insurance
one other thing worth people saying before we do that, sorry, is you should all get Cyber Essentials, which is a government certification, which tests the security, and I'm sure many of the things in your insurance require that level of security. It's a government certification that defines a minimum level of cybersecurity, and it's absolutely a certification you should get, and it's a third-party certification. We implement that for all of our clients, and we implement it for other people as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Jim, and I appreciate there'll be certain people, certain organisations on this call, particularly at the lower end of the SMB space, who might be sitting there and thinking, well, actually, it's just me running my organisation. I don't have an IT department. I don't have that technical literacy to be able to point to within my organisation to help me navigate how I put these steps in place. Cyber Essentials is a fantastic framework for people to follow to be able
Very
to
good.
meet a very straightforward minimum standard of cybersecurity and cyber hygiene within their organisation. So it's a really important point, and thank you for chipping in with that. Just as a bit of a comment, I know we've had a question to this point. In terms of how that then reflects in the cyber insurance market, well, Cyber Essentials is a question that some cyber insurers continue to ask. I've not found a scenario yet where an insurer will refuse to provide cyber insurance to an organization just because they don't have Cyber Essentials, but it will make it more expensive. And so it's always well worthwhile looking at Cyber Essentials, not only as a benefit in terms of setting out that framework and making sure you meet those minimum standards, particularly where you don't have that in-house expertise of an IT department. But it's also useful, and it has a trade-off in terms of coming to that point where actually there's some cyber risk transfer in place to supplement the steps that you take to try and prevent a cyber attack happening in the first place. And that's where cyber insurance really can step in and provide an additional layer of security. If we accept that it's a bit of a when, not if situation when it comes to cyber attacks, having some robust, effective, high quality cyber insurance in place can mean that organizations are far more resilient to the overall impact of that cyber attack than if there is nothing in place. And where cyber insurance differs a little bit from lots of other classes of insurance is it won't just be that financial indemnification. It won't just be that balance sheet protection where if the worst happens, the insurer will write you a check and cover the cost of what's happened. All of the best quality cyber insurance that's available in the market will not only provide that balance sheet protection, but will also provide access to a suite of support services so that when you are in that worst case scenario, where you do log into the system on a Sunday just to check your emails before the start of the working week and see that telltale skull and crossbones ransomware attack, your system being locked down, and a need to pay 10 Bitcoin in ransom to get things unlocked. It's not just about providing you with the financial support to potentially pay the ransom, but certainly reinstate your systems, but also provide you with a route of support through a panel of providers that cyber insurers typically work with, so that you have someone to call and so that you're not on your own about how you can reinstate your systems, particularly for those organizations that don't have that ongoing relationship with the like of ZipTech services and have that immediate person to ring to provide that support. Now is a brilliant time for organizations to be thinking about cyber insurance. As a perhaps a little bit counterintuitive point to everything that we've talked about around the rise of AI and the increased threat of cyber attack as a result of that, the cyber insurance market is in a positive place. There is a lot of capacity in the market, much more willingness on the part of much more, or significantly more insurance companies to provide cyber insurance. And it's a marketplace at the end of the day. And that increased competition means that we are seeing cyber insurance rates and premiums actually go down for the first time in a few years. So it's a brilliant position to be speaking to your insurance brokers and working with them to drive you a really cost-effective deal to supplement all of the proactive steps you can take to increase your cyber resilience with some cyber risk transfer and some balance sheet protection when the worst might occur. Just in terms of some of the things that cyber insurers are really focused on in particular, I'd call out that human element. And we've talked about training as a mechanism to make sure that the staff within your organization understand and can better appreciate cyber risk. And a lot of cyber insurers are increasingly focusing on that human element more so than having things like multi-factor authentication in place, having antivirus protection, having appropriate firewalls. It's the human element that is driving claims scenarios. And that is very much where cyber insurers are focusing in terms of trying to quantify the level of risk that an organization represents and putting a price to that risk for some cyber insurance. And above and beyond that, and it goes back to a point that Jim's articulated so persuasively over the course of this webinar, real focus on backups and the testing of backups. If I were to define and crystallize what cyber insurers are looking for across two key points, it's do you train your staff and do you back up your systems? Because if you aren't doing both of those, the chances of you suffering a loss and, more importantly, being able to recover from a loss are significantly higher. And that will be reflected in the availability of cyber insurance. And if it is available, the sorts of insurance premiums that you'll be paying. But now is a fantastic time, as I say, for all organisations to be speaking to their insurance brokers. Now is the best time to capitalise on what is quite a soft cyber insurance market with lots of insurers who want to provide cyber insurance to organisations. And it should be the best time to drive a really competitive deal for some cyber insurance, which supplements that proactive risk protection through all of those different levers that Jim's been talking about. And so I'm very conscious of time, and I'm conscious that we've had a number of different questions that have come in, which we perhaps won't have the chance to get to. Apologies to all of you who've raised questions that we've not perhaps been able to address over the course of the webinar. What we will do in the context of circulating the recording of this webinar is put together a few FAQs or put together a few notes which specifically address the questions that we've not been able to get to over the course of the session. And we are more than happy to follow up individually with anyone on this call. You should have received my contact details as part of your event invite, but we'll circulate those again after the call, and I'll coordinate with Jim to be able to get you the answers that you need and open up the dialogue where that's appropriate. That aside, Jim, I'll just throw over to you for any final thoughts that you want to touch on in the context of AI. And in the context of what our audience can be doing to make sure that they remain appropriately protected against this exponential raise or increase in cyber risk that's driven by AI.
Yeah, I hope what's come across is this threat is real and rising. But I'd also like to give all of you as non-technical people on the call the confidence that it's very, very basic things that you should be asking your IT people. And the biggest one, as Chris has said, is backup. I would want to see a physical copy of that backup plan. I'd want to see it in front of me in paper. I'd want to see when it had been tested last, and I'd want to see the test results. I want to see all of that. I'd want to understand the patching. The patching is just logic. It's not some computer whizzy, impossible to understand stuff. You'll be able to understand that. So don't let the IT people put you off and push you away from digging into this area. And if you need to go and get a third party to check the work, which is one of the White House's suggestion, was that you need a third party to make sure your IT team's doing the right thing.
Super. Thank you, Jim. And thank you in particular for taking the time to really talk us through the threat landscape as it exists at the moment. It's a scary place, but there are absolutely steps that you can be taking as organisations, and simple steps at that, to mitigate the risk of cyber attack and indeed the severity of cyber attacks when they happen. And of course, it's well worth considering cyber insurance as a mechanism to protect your balance sheet and protect the ongoing viability of your organisation if and when the worst does occur. Thank you for listening to today's conference on the dark side of AI. We hope you found the content useful. This conference was brought to you as an added value service by Clear Insurance Management, a leading independent commercial insurance broker. If you'd like further information on how to protect your company from the damaging effects of cyber attacks, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can call us on 0116 281 9108 or drop us an email at cyberinsurance@thecleargroup.com. We'd be very happy to assist.